They say every job changes you, but mine erased me. I was hired as the last caretaker of Ravenhill Boarding School, a decaying structure hidden deep in the woods, long forgotten by the world, and for good reason. I remember the day I arrived, the cold wind, the silence, the way the trees seemed to lean closer as I stepped inside. But what I didn't know was I would never leave. Not because I wanted to stay, but because something never let me go. Black screen. A distant school bell echoes through the dark old rusted haunting, then flash. A pale face appears on screen, eyes wide frozen in terror. His lips tremble as if trying to scream, but no sound escapes. And just before the silence swallows him, a child's whisper cuts through the air like a knife play with us again. Daniel Grayson was a man unraveling quietly. At 33, he carried the weight of a life that had slowly collapsed, a bitter divorce, a dead-end career that vanished overnight, and a loneliness so loud it echoed in every room he entered. He wasn't searching for a dream anymore, just a way to disappear. That's when he saw it. Tucked between ordinary ads on a sketchy late-night job site, caretaker needed Ravenhill Boarding School. Isolated location, high-pay live-in required. No prior experience necessary. The words didn't feel right, almost like they were written just for him. Something about the name Ravenhill made the hairs on his arms stand. Still, without hesitation, he applied. After all, who else would want a forgotten man to watch over a forgotten place? The journey to Ravenhill was as unsettling as the job offer itself. The road twisted through endless forest, growing narrower and darker with every mile. The sky, once bright, had dimmed unnaturally by the time he reached the outskirts. A suffocating fog began to pour through the trees like breath from a hidden beast, making the world beyond his windshield vanish. His GPS died somewhere along the way. No signal. No turning back. He stopped when the school's rusted iron gate appeared through the mist. Hanging from one crooked post was a splintered wooden sign, Ravenhill Academy, founded 1863. Time and nature had not been kind to it. Vines curled around the letters, and someone, or something, had scratched long, jagged marks into the wood. As Daniel stepped out of his car, the fog wrapped around him like fingers, cold and moist. Overhead, a dozen black crows took flight from the rooftop in unison, their shrieks slicing through the silence. It felt rehearsed, like the school knew he was coming. The courtyard was overgrown, the ground cracked, and the windows of the building looked like shattered eyes watching him. There were no signs of life, no staff, no power, no welcome. But Daniel moved forward, each step slower than the last. Something wasn't right. The building loomed larger with every inch he approached, swallowing sound, stealing warmth. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt asleep, and his presence was waking it up. Then he heard it. A faint tick-tick-tick. Not the sound of a watch, but heavier, rhythmic, distant, yet unmistakably alive. He followed it through the courtyard until he saw it, the massive clock mounted above the school's entrance. The hands were moving, perfectly, consistently, as if it had never stopped. Ravenhill may have been abandoned for decades, but its heart was still beating, and it had started the moment Daniel arrived. Daniel spent the first few hours exploring the decaying interior of Ravenhill, flashlight in one hand, keys in the other, and unease building in his chest. The halls were suffocatingly narrow, their walls lined with peeling wallpaper and old class photos so dusty they looked like ghosts themselves. The air was stale, but not empty. It felt watched, as though the building had paused its breath the moment he entered. He stepped into what looked like an old student dormitory, its wooden door barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, rows of rusted bunk beds stood like silent skeletons. But what caught his attention were the things left behind. Suitcases still sat beneath the beds, children's shoes, tattered teddy bears, half-finished coloring books on side tables. Someone had once tried to pack in a hurry, zippers half open, socks spilling out. On one bed, a red toy truck rested perfectly in the center, clean as if someone had just placed it there. Daniel's hand hovered over it, but he couldn't bring himself to touch. These weren't just forgotten belongings, they were preserved, frozen in time, like the children had vanished mid-laugh. And something deep inside him whispered they never left. Later that evening, Daniel took a mop and began cleaning the long hallway that led to the classrooms. The silence was thick, the kind that grows louder the longer it lasts. As he swept the floor, the sound of the mop dragging echoed off the walls until another sound interrupted it. A faint, high-pitched giggle. He froze. His eyes scanned the hallway. No one. He turned around empty. But the giggle came again. This time, closer. And then silence. The only light came from Daniel's flickering lantern and the pale moon bleeding through shattered windows. As he wandered the upper floors, the quiet was broken only by the occasional creak of a door, followed by the soft click of another one closing behind him. Shadows danced in corners that should have been still. From the cracks of slightly open classroom doors, he could swear he saw figures standing just barely visible. Motionless, watching, but every time he looked directly, they vanished. Like the darkness had swallowed them whole. In the main office, Daniel found a locked drawer. The key rusted and hanging on a hook nearby turned with a shriek. Inside, under a pile of dust-covered files, was a photograph. A class photo, black and white, curled at the edges, dated June 1987. At first glance, it looked normal: 26 children, 3 teachers, and a smiling headmaster. But as Daniel held it under the lantern's light, dread crawled up his spine. Every single child's face was violently scratched out with something sharp. Lines dug so deep into the paper, they tore it in places, all but one. In the last row, far right, one child's face remained untouched. A boy no older than 10, staring straight into the camera. Pale blank expression. Daniel leaned closer. His blood ran cold. The face looked exactly like him. By the third night, Daniel had stopped trying to convince himself that everything was normal. The whispers, the shadows, the unnerving feeling that the building breathed with him. None of it could be explained by old pipes or creaking wood. He couldn't sleep, and something deep inside him told him not to. Instead, he wandered the empty halls, lantern in hand, until he found a narrow stairwell behind the library that spiraled downward. A brass plaque above it read, "Archive Staff Only." The staircase groaned with each step, descending into darkness that felt untouched for decades. As he reached the bottom, a heavy wooden door stood before him. It opened slowly, reluctantly, revealing a room choked with dust and silence. Rows of old cabinets stood like coffins, files spilling out from broken drawers. The air was thick, heavy with age and memory. At the center of the room, a cluttered desk sat beneath a stained glass window, its colored light casting eerie patterns on the walls. Something about the room felt cold, not physically, but deeply, inwardly cold, like the kind of chill that touches the soul. As Daniel sifted through the files, he pulled out a brittle envelope, sealed and labeled in fading ink, "Ravenhill Tragedy, 1987. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping, its headline bold and cruel: 27 students vanish overnight, school shut down. One staff member survives, declared insane. His breath caught as he read the first paragraph. The article described the mass disappearance of nearly 30 children, all without a trace. No bodies, no suspects, no answers. The only witness was the school's caretaker, a man whose name had been scratched out in pen. The article said he was found muttering to himself in the school chapel, rocking back and forth, eyes blank. He kept repeating the same words, "They never left." Daniel's hands trembled as he set the clipping aside. In the drawer beneath, he found something heavier, a leather-bound journal, cracked and fragile. Inside were pages filled with frantic handwriting, some so shaky they barely stayed on the lines. The entries spoke of strange events, nights without time, children appearing in mirrors, and voices that knew things they shouldn't. Then he reached a line that made his blood turn to ice. "They play at night, they call me by name, but I never told them my name." The ink was smudged beneath it, as if a tear had fallen just after writing those words. Suddenly, the room shifted. The light dimmed, the air tightened. Daniel turned slowly toward the chalkboard on the far wall. It had been blank when he entered. Now he watched in paralyzed silence as a single piece of chalk lifted off the tray and began to move, screeching slowly across the board. One letter at a time, deliberate. Final. "Welcome back, Daniel." He dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a dull thud, echoing too long for such a small room. Daniel stumbled back, heart pounding, eyes wide. He hadn't told anyone his name since arriving. No one had asked. But something in this place already knew. and it had been waiting. The next morning, Daniel had had enough. His hands shook as he packed what little he had brought, and without a second glance at the lifeless walls behind him, he marched toward the main gate. The fog hadn't lifted since his arrival, and it clung to his skin like wet cloth. But as he reached the gate, his stomach dropped. The chains were wrapped tighter than before, locked with a rusted padlock that hadn't been there when he first arrived. He pushed, kicked it, but the metal didn't budge. The road he'd come from gone, in its place only trees. Endless twisted trees that didn't look familiar at all. It was as if the school had severed its last connection to the outside world. He was trapped. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He barricaded his door, left the lantern on, and sat in the corner gripping the caretaker's journal like a weapon. Around 3 a.m., his body finally gave in, eyes closing involuntarily, but peace never came. He awoke with a choking gasp, his chest heavy, like something was crushing it. As his eyes blinked open, he froze in absolute terror. A child was sitting on his chest, not a shadow, not a dream. A real child, pale, expressionless, eyes black like empty pits. The boy leaned forward, his cold breath brushing Daniel's ear, and whispered in a slow, echoing voice, "You're one of us now?" Daniel screamed and threw himself back. But the child had vanished. Not disappeared, vanished, as if he had never been there at all. Panting and drenched in sweat, Daniel stumbled out of his room and ran through the halls, his feet slapping against the cracked tiles. The lights flickered wildly above him, buzzing like flies. Then, without realizing how, he found himself standing before a hallway he'd never seen before. It wasn't on any floor plan, he was sure of it, yet now it was there. And the door at the end stood open, inviting. Inside, the room was small, almost like a nursery. A broken crib sat in the corner, its mattress torn and dusty. Toys were scattered across the floor, wooden blocks, a stuffed rabbit, a bull that slowly rolled toward him without being touched. On the far wall were shelves lined with photo frames. Daniel stepped closer, and his breath stopped. Every photo was of him, not as he was now, but as a child. Different ages, different moments. Birthday cake, school uniform, holding a teddy bear. Some pictures he remembered, others he had no memory of ever taking. He stared in disbelief. How were they here? Then a voice, calm, deep and distant, floated through the air. "This was your classroom, remember?" Daniel turned toward the mirror on the opposite wall, shaking. But what he saw made his knees buckle. The reflection staring back wasn't his. The man in the mirror wore an old, dust-covered caretaker's uniform, his face wrinkled, worn, hollow. But the eyes were his. The reflection tilted its head, smirked, and raised one hand just as Daniel did the same. It was him, but not now. This was someone else. Someone from the past. From 1987. He stumbled back in horror, knocking over a chair as the mirror began to crack, not from the outside, but from within. By now, Daniel no longer questioned whether he was awake or dreaming. Ravenhill had blurred that line long ago. The voices of the children echoed without mouths. The rooms shifted without warning, and the building, it felt alive, pulsing with memory. But something inside Daniel had changed. A pull, a feeling, like he was remembering something he was never supposed to forget. The whispers kept drawing him toward the courtyard, where the dead grass swayed without wind, and the crows had gone silent. Guided by instinct more than reason, Daniel picked up a rusted shovel from behind the shed and walked into the middle of the yard where the earth felt oddly soft. As he pushed the blade into the dirt, the ground let go too easily, as if it wanted to give up its secret. He dug fast, frantically, his breath turning to fog in the cold night. Then thud. Something wooden. He cleared away the soil, heart hammering, and uncovered a small, rotting box. His hand shook as he wiped away the dirt and froze. His name, Daniel Grayson, carved into the lid in uneven, childlike letters. He hesitated, then slowly opened it. Inside, time stopped. An old school uniform, the crest of Ravenhill still visible on the pocket. A plastic student ID with his childhood photo and name. And at the bottom, a folded piece of yellowed paper. He opened it, hands trembling. It was a journal page, his own handwriting. "They brought me back. Again. I thought I escaped." But I never left. Daniel's knees hit the ground. His breath quickened. The memories began to rush in flashes of children's laughter. Desks, chalkboards, screams. Not as a visitor, as a student. He wasn't here for the first time. He was here again. Ravenhill didn't find new caretakers. It recycled the ones who tried to leave. The wind shifted, leaves scattered, and then he heard them, giggling, from all around him. Daniel looked up. Dozens of children now stood in a circle, surrounding him, pale, silent, dressed in uniforms that hadn't been worn since the 80s. Their eyes were empty, glowing faintly in the dark. They began stepping closer, their voices in perfect, haunting unison. "It's your turn now. Time to watch over us forever." Daniel backed away, but the circle tightened. The air grew thick. The school bell rang once, then again, then a third time. Dong, 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 and just like that everything stopped. Silence, stillness, darkness. And the clock above the school began ticking again from the beginning. Days, months, maybe years had passed. Time didn't behave normally at Ravenhill. The fog never cleared, and the school never slept. But today the air felt heavier, more expectant, like something had been reset. A black car approached slowly through the crooked forest trail, tires crunching the gravel road that hadn't been touched in decades. A man stepped out, early 30s, briefcase in hand, nervous eyes scanning the enormous crumbling structure before him. He pulled a folded newspaper clipping from his coat pocket. Caretaker needed Ravenhill boarding school. The same words, the same ad, almost as if it had been placed just for him. The gates creaked open before he could knock. The fog parted as he walked up the cracked path. At the entrance, someone was already waiting. A man stood beneath the arch, wearing a faded caretaker's coat, long, dusty, the school's crest barely visible on the chest. His face was pale, older than it should have been, but calm, too calm, and his eyes, they didn't blink. "Welcome to Ravenhill," the man said softly, his lips curling into a cold, mechanical smile. "You'll love it here." It was Daniel, but not the Daniel who had arrived desperate and broken. This Daniel had changed, not just aged, but transformed. The new applicant hesitated for a second, unsettled by the strange stillness of his greeter. But Daniel simply turned and walked inside, leaving the door wide open, expecting him to follow. The school loomed, watching, breathing. And somewhere deep within, the clock began ticking again. As the door slowly creaked shut behind them, a faint whisper echoed through the hall. The same voice that had once belonged to a man desperate to escape. "I never left." Then silent. The screen fades to black. A soft child's laugh breaks the darkness and lingers.